The girl rode into town on a sun-blistered afternoon, the kind where even the lizards sought shade and horses snorted dust like smoke from their nostrils. She came alone, atop a rangy chestnut with a scar down its flank and a bridle patched with twine. Folks on the porch of the general store watched her with that dry-eyed suspicion they reserved for strangers, especially ones like her, too young to ride alone, too lean to be fed regular, and carrying a gaze like she'd seen things no decent soul should. She tied her horse outside the saloon, not looking twice at the eyes that followed her. There were whispers already, and by nightfall the name took root. Trouble. It stuck like burrs in dry denim. Some said she'd shot a man down in Arizona. Others reckoned she ran with outlaws, maybe worse. The way she wore her hat low, shadowing half her face, and the knife strapped plain to her boot didn't help, nor did the silence she held like a shield. The barkeep didn't ask her name when she slid a coin across the counter and asked for water, then whiskey. She drank both without flinching, then sat at a back table with her back to the wall and eyes on the door. Every movement was measured. There was no wasted breath. He saw her first through the window pane, hammer in hand and shirt streaked with sawdust. Elijah Coyle, the new ranch foreman up at Bishop's Hollow, had come into town for nails and a coil of rope, but caught the storm in her before he even stepped down from the wagon. She was young, 18, maybe 20, but hollowed out in a way he knew too well, like someone who'd walked through fire and never mentioned the burns. He didn't say anything that day. Just watched as she left the saloon at dusk, trailing shadows, saddlebags slung over one shoulder. The way she walked, you'd think she had nowhere to be, and yet no intention of staying. Still, he saw it. She flinched when a boy dropped a crate too hard across the street. Not much, just the twitch of a shoulder and the stiffening of her back. But it was there, that crack in the armor. Over the weeks, trouble stayed. She didn't give a name, and no one asked. She earned her keep mucking stalls at the livery and patching fences for pennies. Slept above the stable, curled beside her horse like she trusted the animal more than people. And maybe she did. Rumors clung to her like smoke. A gambler's daughter, a thief, a runaway. Once, the sheriff tried to question her about a wanted poster from Nevada, but she met his gaze flat and hard, and he left with nothing but her silence. But Elijah noticed more than the talk. He saw the way she stiffened at sudden hands, how she'd take a blow rather than flinch from it, and how, sometimes, when the wind came down from the hills and carried the smell of cedar and rain, she'd go very still and far away, like she was back somewhere she didn't speak of. One evening, late September, when the air had the scent of frost curling in its lungs, Elijah found her at the edge of Bishop's Hollow. She was fixing a section of broken rail alone, sleeves rolled up, sweat marking her shirt. She didn't look up when he approached, just kept working like every post she drove into the earth was a ghost she meant to bury. "You always work by moonlight?" he asked. She didn't stop. "Fence needs mending." "You been here near a month." "Oh, nobody nothing anymore, yet here you are." She paused then, hammer slack in her grip. Idle hands get noticed. He stepped closer, and this time she looked at him. There was something tight in her jaw, not defiance but defense. Like she knew how fast kindness could turn sharp. "You hungry?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They sat on a split log by the fire he built, the stars coming out slow overhead. He passed her a tin plate and a cup of coffee thick as creek mud. She ate without saying a word, slow and wary, like someone used to counting every bite. When they were done, he didn't ask her name. Didn't ask where she'd come from or what she'd done, just said, "Storm's coming tomorrow, you'll need shelter." "I've weathered worse." "I don't doubt it. Still, you're welcome at the bunkhouse." She shook her head. "I don't sleep easy under roofs." There was silence between them, long and heavy like a snowfall. And then he asked, gentle as he could, "Who taught you to be afraid of quiet places?" She looked away, eyes shining sudden with something fierce and hurting. "Not afraid," she said. "Just learn not to trust what comes after peace." He didn't push, just passed her another cup and let the silence fall again. That night, as the fire burned down to embers and she rode back toward town with her hat pulled low and the storm clouds gathering in the west, Elijah knew two things. They called her trouble, but he'd seen the bruises she carried in silence and the way she never let the storm inside her touch anyone else. And somehow, that made him believe she wasn't trouble at all, just lost. And maybe looking, even if she didn't know it yet, for someone who'd see her plain and stay anyway. The storm came before dawn, dragging its fury across the plains like a wounded thing. Wind peeled shingles from rooftops and drove rain sideways into shuttered windows. It flooded the dry riverbeds and made ghosts of the roads, swallowed whole by rising mud. In the loft above the livery, Trouble lay awake, boots still on, knife under her pillow. The rain drummed steady overhead, a rhythm she could not sleep through. The chestnut shifted below her, uneasy with the thunder. She whispered to him, low and sure, the way she might to a scared child. Words that didn't matter, just the cadence of comfort. She hadn't taken the bunkhouse offer. Couldn't. Too many walls made her skin itch. Too much quiet, and she'd hear the voices again. Hear him, the man with the hands like iron and the laugh that still curled in her bones like wire. So she stayed with the animals, among the sweat and hay and warm, breathing things that never raised their voices. That morning when the rain broke and left the town soaked through and sullen, she set to work without waiting for direction. Shoveling sand from the livery door, bailing water from the low stalls, she didn't speak, didn't complain. Just moved from one need to the next, as if still running from something and hoping hard labor might keep it at bay. By noon, the sun showed itself in patches, and she made her way toward Bishop's Hollow. The rail she'd fixed still held, though the mud had tried to claim it. She checked each post anyway, hands rough with calluses. That's where Elijah found her again, crouched low, pressing a palm to a sodden beam like she was listening for the land's pulse. He came without noise, his horse trailing slow behind him. She didn't look up this time, just said, "Reckon I did a poor job," stormed near undid the lot. He dismounted, tying off the reins. "You held it together." "That counts." She stood, brushing grit from her trousers. The light caught the bruise on her wrist, old, yellowing, but still visible. He didn't stare, just took note of it the way a tracker sees a broken twig and knows something passed through. "Still think I'm worth feeding?" she asked, not unkindly. "Think you're worth a damn sight more than that." They walked the fence line together. He handed her nails when needed, kept pace without comment. She didn't talk much, but her silence had softened since the first time. She no longer kept her back to him like she expected a blow. When the work was done, he asked her again about the bunkhouse. "You don't gotta stay under a roof," he said, "but the hills carry cold worse than most reckon, and you've paid your keep." She didn't answer. Not then. That night she rode up to the hollow with the moon sharp above and frost slicking the grass like glass. Her horse shivered, tired. She saw light in the bunkhouse window, and for a long time she just sat in the saddle, watching. Inside, the others were asleep. Farmhands and cowboys, spread out in their bunks with boots lined neat and guns within reach. Elijah was still awake, seated at the table with a ledger open and a cup cooling beside him. He looked up as she stepped through the door. "Wasn't sure you'd come," he said, voice low. She hesitated in the frame. "I won't be trouble." "You're not." He pointed to an empty bunk near the back. Clean, blanket folded, a space carved out just for her. She didn't speak again, just nodded once and walked slow, her steps unsure, like a deer testing ice. She set her things down without a sound. Then she sat, hands clasped, eyes on the floorboards. Elijah didn't press, just went back to his ledger. Later, when the fire had burned low and all the men snored in uneven rhythm, Elijah heard the soft creak of her cot. He looked up. She stood at the window, watching the trees bend in the wind. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She didn't turn. "Don't sleep easy, that's all." He waited, then she said, quieter still, "He used to come at night. When the house was quiet, when I couldn't scream loud enough for anybody to hear." Elijah didn't move, didn't speak, just let the truth hang there, fragile and cold. She turned then, eyes shining not with tears, but something rower, shame. Fury, relief. "I left him dead in a dry riverbed," she said. He met her gaze. "Good." She didn't expect that, and in the silence that followed, something shifted, not trust, not yet, but something near it. Outside, the wind howled through the pine, and inside, the girl they called Trouble stood a little straighter, her hands unclenched at her sides. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was a beginning. Winter made no apology when it came, just rolled in heavy from the mountains with iron skies and a wind that stripped the trees bare overnight. The land turned to frostbitten silence, and folk in town huddled closer to stoves, voices hushed beneath scarves and steam. At Bishop's Hollow, work didn't stop. It just slowed, turned quieter, more inward. Horses needed blanketing, fences needed checking, and the herd needed to be brought in from the higher pastures before snow made the trail impassable. She stayed, didn't sleep much, but she stayed. No one called her trouble anymore. They didn't call her much at all. She hadn't offered a name, and most folks didn't know how to ask. But they started nodding when she passed. Started leaving her coffee at the edge of the table and tools within reach. She didn't joke or smile like the others, but she worked hard, and that earned her a place, if not comfort. Elijah watched it happen, quiet as always. Never pressed, never praised. Just made sure her bunk stayed dry and her boots didn't go missing, and sometimes left an apple by her saddle like it had fallen there by accident. One morning, when the sun cracked through the clouds and spilled light over the frost like spilled milk, they rode out together to check the northern fence line. The sky was pale blue and brittle as glass, the cold sharp in the lungs. Her horse was skittish, hooves slipping on the ice-backed trail, but she didn't complain. Just leaned forward in the saddle, hands steady. They reached the ridge just as the wind shifted. A lone pine stood there, bent and blackened at its base where lightning had struck some summer long past. Beyond it, the land stretched open and empty, white with fresh snow. "Elijah," she said then, quietly, like she was testing the shape of his name. He turned toward her, reins looped loose in his glove. "Yeah." She pointed to the tree. "We had one like that back home. Mama said it marked the edge of the world." He waited, she squinted against the wind. He buried her under it, said it was fitting. Elijah didn't reach for her, didn't touch her arm or offer words that would only bruise. But he said, "You don't have to keep it inside to survive." She nodded once, curt, like a soldier taking an order, but her lips trembled with it, and for a long moment she didn't speak. That night the bunkhouse was too full of dreams. The men laughed over cards, and someone played a fiddle tune out of tune but earnest. She sat outside on the step, breath fogging in the cold. Elijah came out after a while, carrying 2 mugs and a wool blanket. He sat beside her without asking and handed her the cup. The heat soaked into her hands. "You were right," she said eventually. "About what?" "It's easier when you say it out loud. Doesn't change what happened. But it loosens its grip." Elijah took a sip. "Yeah, it does." She looked out toward the barn, dark and quiet in the moonlight. "I used to think surviving meant keeping secrets. Holding everything in so tight, nothing could touch it. Sometimes it does. But now," her voice wavered, "now I think maybe surviving is something else. Maybe it's letting someone sit beside you and not walk away." He didn't move. Just sat there, steady as stone. She pulled the blanket tighter and after a while leaned her shoulder lightly against his, barely there, just enough to feel the warmth. They didn't speak again that night. In the weeks that followed, she began to shift in small, careful ways. She ate with the others more often, helped mend a coat for one of the younger hands. Once, when a mare foaled too early and the air was full of fear and blood, she stayed beside the animal all night, whispering calm into her ear until the sun rose and the foal blinked into the world, breathing and alive. No one said much, but they noticed. And Elijah, he kept pace, never rushed her, never reached beyond what she offered. But he was there in the quiet moments and the hard ones, like a steady beat beneath a song too sad to sing out loud. Late one evening, when the snow fell soft and thick and the hollow was still, she stood at the edge of the corral watching the flakes gather on the rails. Elijah found her there. She didn't turn when he approached, just said, "I have a name. I don't use it much." "I'd like to know it," he said. She turned then, and in her eyes was the storm she carried, yes, but also something gentler now, something healing. "Marin," she said. And in the way he said it back, soft, like he was holding something sacred, she knew he saw her. Not the bruises, not the silence, not even the storm, just her. Spring did not arrive with trumpets or bloom. It crept in slow, tentative, testing each thaw with a late frost. The snow receded inch by inch, exposing the bent grass beneath and the bones of the season before. And with it came the melt, wet earth, swollen creeks, and the scent of mud thick in the lungs. Marin worked same as always, but her eyes softened with the changing light. She no longer flinched when laughter broke out behind her. No longer sat at the far end of the table. Some mornings she even braided her hair back, not to hide it, but to feel the weight of her own care. Elijah noticed these things, though he said little. The men noticed too. One of them, a young hand named Lyle, tried to slip her a wildflower one morning, half shy, half foolish. She'd taken it, turned it over once in her fingers, and pressed it into the pages of her pocket-worn book. Not for love, but for proof that she could hold something delicate without it dying in her grasp. It was near calving time when the letter arrived. Elijah brought it from town, folded tight, no return mark. He handed it to her without question, though his fingers brushed hers longer than usual, and his eyes searched her face for storm signs. She didn't open it in front of him, just slid it into her coat and walked off toward the ridge. She read it under the bent pine, back to the wind. No tears, no outburst, just the sound of paper folding slow and precise. When she came back down, she went straight to the barn and worked harder than usual, scrubbing tack and hauling feed like the world would stop turning if she didn't. He didn't ask until dusk. "Bad news," he said, voice low. She leaned against the stall, arms folded. "My sister, she's alive." Elijah blinked. He hadn't known there been a sister. Name's Lissa, younger. Left when I did, only she didn't make it far. Ended up with some preacher's family out in Utah. They raised her like she was theirs. She only just tracked me down. "That's good then," he said carefully. Marin looked away. "She wants me to come, stay a while, meet her husband. Says she's got a room for me if I want it." Silence hung there a moment, thick as smoke. "You think you'll go?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "Feels like leaving a skin behind." He understood. Change was its own kind of grief. That night she didn't sleep in the bunkhouse, took her bedroll and vanished into the trees instead. When Elijah found her the next morning, she was crouched by a stream, face to the water, as if listening for something deeper than sound. "You ever think you're too broken to be anything else?" she asked when he came near. He sat on a rock across from her. "Yeah, I used to." "What changed?" He paused. "I let someone stay long enough to prove me wrong." They didn't speak again. The water moved between them, cold and clean. In the days that followed, she rode farther, staying out past dark, not running but searching. She returned each time, tired but clear-eyed. One morning she brought back a sparrow's egg, blue and whole in her palm, and set it gently in the crook of a cottonwood's roots. When Elijah came to her on the final night before her decision, he found her brushing her horse slow and tender, as though saying goodbye. "She got a place near the canyons," Marin said. "Says the light there is different. Makes things look newer. You think you'll find peace there?" She looked up. "I think I'll find her. That might be enough." He nodded. "But if I go," her voice caught raw, "if I go and I don't come back, you'll remember me as more than trouble." He stepped closer, the smell of dust and leather between them. "I'll remember you as the girl who walked through fire and stayed kind," he said, "the one who taught a broken man how to listen again." And in the silence that followed, she took his hand for the first time, not for comfort, not for goodbye. Just because it was time. Marin left before dawn, the sky still holding to its stars like secrets. No goodbyes, just a folded scrap left on Elijah's saddle, his name in her hand, the ink smudged slightly where her thumb must have lingered. He found it as the sun crested the ridge, lighting the frost in the grass like fire. She didn't say where she was headed exactly, only that she needed to see what her life might look like in the mirror of someone who hadn't lived it alongside her pain. She hoped the land out there would let her breathe, hoped he would keep walking forward, not waiting for her shadow to reappear behind him. He didn't chase her. He went back to his work, to the rhythm of fence lines and bridles and stubborn colts. But the hollow felt different now, as if the light came in at a sharper angle. Her absence wasn't loud. It was quieter than that. The kind of missing that settles in the corners of things, the sound of a second cup never poured, a question that no longer has someone to answer it. Weeks passed, rain came and went, washing the last of the snow from the gullies. The creeks ran clear, the fields greened in slow, cautious shades, and Elijah did what he always did, worked the land. listened. Waited though he'd told himself he wouldn't. Marin, meanwhile, was learning her sister's world. It was softer than hers. A house with shutters that clacked in the breeze, not fists. A husband with a farmer's hands and a patient smile. Chickens in the yard, books on the shelf, children who laughed too loud and cried without shame. Lissa had grown into a woman who knew how to mend things, clothes, hearts, silences. She welcomed Marin with arms that still remembered the shape of shared terror and the warmth of survival. For a time, Marin stayed. She helped with chores, learned to bake cornbread that didn't taste like regret, and sat long hours on the porch, watching the light move across the valley. She found herself smiling more, even laughing, though it always surprised her. But peace, she learned, wasn't the absence of pain. It was the place where the pain no longer led. One evening, Lissa found her staring at the hills with a quiet in her bones. "You're not made to stay still, are you?" her sister asked. Marin shook her head. "I'm made to listen to the wind. And right now, it's calling me back." Lissa didn't argue, just took her hand and squeezed it. When Marin rode away the next morning, the children waved from the porch. Lissa watched without tears because they both knew goodbye wasn't a wound, it was a promise made honest. She rode slow this time, not fleeing, not chasing, just moving like the rivers thawing in the spring. Nights she camped under stars, she thought of Elijah. Wondered if the quiet had grown deeper without her, or if maybe, just maybe, it had waited like he had. She arrived at the hollow in the blue hour when the sun was gone but the sky hadn't settled into dark. The land smelled of grass and rain. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and pale. She didn't go to the bunkhouse. Instead, she walked to the fence line, to the place they'd once stood together beneath a wounded pine. It had split in the last storm, one limb cracked and dangling but still standing. She stood there until the wind shifted, carrying the sound of hooves. Elijah rode up slow, dismounted without a word. They looked at each other a long time. Then she said, voice steady, "I wanted to see if it still felt like home." And her eyes softened. "It does, not the land, not the buildings, just this." He didn't move to take her hand, didn't kiss her like in the stories. Instead, he said, "I kept your space." And she smiled. That night she slept in the bunkhouse again, not as a visitor, not as a runaway, but as someone returning. By the time summer took hold of the land, full and golden and heavy with heat, Marin had made a life not stitched from survival, but choice. She rose with the sun, her boots dusty before most folks were even stirring, and worked until her muscles sang. But it wasn't penance anymore. It was rhythm. It was a way of touching the land and letting it touch her back. The men no longer saw her as the girl who might vanish come dawn. She was woven into the place now. They brought her stories, asked her opinion on tools, and whether, argued with her over saddle fits like she'd always been there. She earned their trust not with words, but with quiet presence, the kind that steadied things. She kept her bunk neat, still curled to the edge some nights, out of habit more than fear, but the knife no longer slept beneath her pillow. It hung now by the stable door, used only for rope and feed sacks. And that, Elijah once said, felt like a miracle in its own right. As for him, they shared time the way old trees shared shade, easy, without fuss. They sat together at dusk, mostly quiet, sometimes trading a memory like cards. Neither pressed for more than the other could give. One morning, she woke to the sound of sparrows nesting in the eaves. She lay still for a while, listening. Then dressed and walked barefoot to the pasture, dew slicking her ankles. Elijah was there, leaning against the rail with a tin cup in his hand. He looked over when she stepped near. "They've come back," she said, nodding toward the birds. "They know where it's safe." Marin watched the sky, so do I. They didn't speak again until the sun lifted full above the trees. Later that week, a letter arrived from Lissa. Just a few lines, news of a new calf, the children learning to swim, a pie recipe she swore would change Marin's life. Marin read it aloud by the bunkhouse fire, her voice unguarded, strong. That night Elijah found her sitting alone beneath the bent pine, the stars bold above them. "You think you'll ever go back?" he asked. "I might, visit, not to stay." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "I thought I was born to run," she said. "Thought the only way to stay alive was to keep moving. And now I think I just hadn't found a place worth stopping for." He stepped closer, and this is. She turned toward him, eyes clear. It is. They didn't kiss, not yet. But the space between them narrowed until it wasn't space at all, just shared breath and the warmth of two people who knew storms not as things to fear, but as things that passed. By autumn, they were a pair by understanding more than declaration. He brought her coffee the way she liked. She kept his tools in better order than he ever could. They argued sometimes, sharp and fast, but never cruel. And always they came back to the fence line, to the quiet, to the place they'd first begun to see each other without armor. One evening, as the leaves burned gold and the air turned thin, a ranch hand asked Marin what she'd done before this. What she'd been, she paused, then said, I was lost. And now? She looked toward Elijah, who stood brushing down a horse with slow, thoughtful strokes. Now, she said, I'm becoming. And that was it, no grand declarations, no rescue. Just a bond built slow as morning, true as the land. They'd called her trouble once. But what she was, what she'd always been, was a woman carrying a storm with grace. And he, a man who saw it not as ruin, but as rain that might make something grow.